Which are the best match type strategies for Amazon sponsored brand campaigns for branded keywords? This is a question that came up, and I want to talk about it because it's a little bit different with branded keywords than with unbranded keywords. Who am I? I'm David Goldenberg. I founded the 11 Ads for Brands agency after leading the marketing for a Amazon brand that grew from 30 million a year to 57 million a year. And we did a heck of a lot with the sponsored brands. We tripled the monthly sales from about 200,000 a month to over 600,000 a month. What is working today is not what used to work. So I'm filming this in March 26. If you're watching older videos about sponsored brands and their match type strategies, you can probably put those aside because there's been a lot of changes to how the match types work. So what I'm going to cover is, first of all, the way the match types work today, how that affects your cost per click and your ACOS, and also what the difference is going to be between sponsored brands, between branded keywords as well as unbranded keywords. So let's start. People think that you've got just 3 match types in sponsored brands, but in fact you basically have 4 in addition to ASIN targeting and category targeting. So there's exact match, there's phrase match, there's broad match modified, and broad match unmodified. And that's why there's really 4 targeting types, and you can even arguably call it 5 because you can mix broad match modified with broad match unmodified. So let's start with the basics. Exact match and what it was and what it is today. What it used to be traditionally was your keyword as targeted, as written into the Amazon system, had to exactly match the search term typed in by a customer, except for plurals, singular, or other very close variations. For example, the use of the word of, the, similar stop words would be ignored. Now, Amazon eventually came up with something called intent match, and so they will also match your ad to search terms that reflect the same intent. To keep things very simple, if you've got a wood side table as your keyword, right, then a wooden side table would also match. But also if somebody writes oak side table or cherry side table and similar keywords like that, you would also show up on those keywords. Sometimes intent match works well. Generally, it's been working pretty well recently, but historically it didn't do so well. So that's something to keep in mind. And it also means that if you're using exact match targeting, you still need to use negative keywords. This is something a lot of people miss. They think, well, I'm just going to get search terms that are exactly what I targeted. That's not the case. And so if you're putting in wood side table, but your side tables are made of, let's say, oak, and they're not made of maple or cherry or whatever other types, so you need to specify that in your negatives, right? For example, particle board also, you might want to put that in. Or if your wood is particle board, you might want to specify whole wood as a negative phrase match, right? So any search term that includes the word whole wood won't show up, won't draw your ads, cause them to show up. The next match type we have is phrase match. And phrase match means you can have your keyword plus something before or after it. That's how it works traditionally. Again, intent match expands that further, and the intent matching on phrase match is a bit looser than with exact match, at least from what I can see. The next type is broad match modified. What broad match modified means is that you put plus signs in front of the keywords you're targeting. So over here I've got plus wood, plus side, plus table. That's an example of a broad match modified keyword. So what this means is that each of the keywords where you have a plus sign needs to be included in the search term. So in a certain sense, this is actually more strict targeting than exact or phrase match, because over here you can require them to include your targeted keywords in the customer search term. And this is in contrast, for example, to me writing wood side table like that as a broad match keyword without the plus signs. And this is broad match unmodified, which means they can match to these, a search term that includes these keywords in any order, right? With broad match, unlike phrase match, the order of the words doesn't matter. So it could be side table would, but it could also be something that just reflects the same intent. For example, they could just call it bedroom side table, and if they think that also matches the intent, they would also show your ad for that. And would might not be there in the search term whatsoever, or even the word side might not be there. So you could actually end up targeting would table if Amazon thinks that that is the intent of the searcher, if they're going for a side table. For example, maybe they searched for side table before and now they're searching for wood table, so you might get your ad showing up and you could get that click, even though wood table doesn't specifically imply a side table, and I would tend to think that would be more of a dining room, kitchen kind of table. Now you can combine these, as I said. You could also have, for example, wood plus side table, and then the words wood and table would only optionally be in your search term, but the word side would necessarily show up over there. So this is broad match unmodified. Now you need to understand that targeting has changed a lot on Amazon. The traditional way to get better results was to increase your control. So as much targeting as possible on exact match, maybe a bit on phrase, and broad match was basically just for exploration. Nowadays, that's very different because Amazon pushes all the time to get you using targeting that gives them more control. So they want you using broad match. They want you using ASIN targeting because that's basically just giving them, total control basically over your stuff. It just needs to somewhat resemble the ASIN that you targeted, have some relevance between the search term and the ASIN that you targeted, which is like super broad, right? It's roughly like category targeting. So because they want you to do that, they're giving you incentive by having lower cost per click, in many cases with broad match. Even if you're getting the exact same search term as you would get with exact match, you're paying more per click for the same thing with the same ad using exact match. And with broad match unmodified, you're also getting a lot more traffic than you might get with broad match modified. We targeted the exact same words in the exact same campaign, just one target had plus signs in front of all the keywords. One target did not have. They're both on broad match, so we had broad match modified and unmodified. The broad match modified got maybe a few hundred impressions and less than 5 clicks, whereas the broad match unmodified got hundreds of clicks, lots of sales, and you can see where they're trying to direct the traffic, even though many of those impressions and clicks could have showed up from the broad match modified. And within Amazon's own documentation, officially, if you have equal bids, they'll try to give the impression to the more precise targeting type. Apparently that doesn't apply between broad match modified and unmodified. So if you're using unbranded keywords, and here's the catch, I want to get back to what we were talking about earlier. So now we're going to transition to point 3. Those are the match types we talked about that you have within Amazon for sponsored brands. And they're pushing really for us to go with broad match unmodified as much as possible, as well as broad match modified over exact and phrase. You get more traffic, you get a broader range, a lot of terms that you might not have thought of. And also they're doing, different magic on the back end to match it to people that have a higher chance to convert. And all of that works great if you're doing generic keywords, i.e. keywords that don't include your brand name or your product name. What happens if you're specifically looking for branded keywords? This is point 4. you need to make sure that those brand terms or those product terms show up in your search term. And so from experience, having tried broad match unmodified with branded campaigns, it was a disaster. Hundreds of clicks, just a handful of sales. And this is, the equivalent branded terms when the brand actually shows up in the search term got conversion rates over 20 or 30%, right? So we're talking about single digits, low single digits versus 20, 30% conversion rates. Broad match unmodified does not work for branded keywords. You need to use either broad match modified with the plus signs or phrase or exact. My recommendation, go with broad match modified, because then you can ensure that your targeted brand terms show up for sure in the search term and you're not getting all kinds of other junk. And one more tip, because you can't just go ahead and run out without this, use negatives also in your branded campaigns, especially if you're using exact and phrase. Recall that that can also target intent match keyword search terms. And so your, Adidas basketball shoe might just show up on a basketball shoe or trainers or men's running shoes. So you need to make sure that you're not showing up on running shoes if you're advertising basketball shoes, for example. If you want to improve your profitability, right, lower your ACOS by 20% or more in the next 6 weeks, get in touch in the form below. We're offering it to the brands that qualify. We have certain criteria. You need to be at least 7 figures, ideally in home goods, but not necessarily. So check it out, see if you can qualify for a free offer. We'll manage all your ads, not just put you on an AI tool, 6 weeks, okay? And we get your ACOS down at least 20% guaranteed. Check it out in the description.